Welcome to Mike's on Mike, a conversation about politics, government, and Jacksonville. Join 50-year opinion leaders Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and award-winning broadcaster and longtime political observer, Mike Miller.
Welcome to another episode of Mike's on Mike. It's great to have you with us. Once again, Mike Hightower is with me in studio today, which is kind of odd, but we're delighted to have him. Mike Tolbert, of course, is back in the barn shoveling. We all know what. But good to have you guys with us. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Certainly did. And our show, as always, brought to you by the Jacksonville History Center, which is incorporated into the Jacksonville Historical Society, or it's the other way around. The society is actually part of the History Center. And one of these days, we're going to have Alan Bliss on the show with us to talk about the center and what he's planning on doing there and why we have it and all of the things that go into that. It should be a fascinating program. I'm really looking forward to doing that, and so is everybody else. We have a very special show today. We think, unfortunately, one of our guests is here only because he's got to pay penance, I think, to us from his last appearance, and that's City Councilman Matt Carlucci. You may recall Matt was actually on the show with us back in September.
Yes.
One of our original guests. It's great to have you back again.
And our donors stayed with us, even despite that Matt was with us.
Oh, I begged like crazy. I'm telling you.
I know. It's a heavy cross to bear.
I had to wish away my firstborn, and I had to do all kinds of things just to keep Alan Bliss and all of our donors with us on that. It was great. We also want to welcome Dr. Sherry McGill. Nice to have you with us, Sherry.
Welcome, Sherry.
Well, Mike. It's fun to be with you all.
Mike, and Pat. And Matt.
I don't know why I'm here, but I always enjoy being with the council member.
There you go. Thank you. I suspect that if we took a toll, the Laura Street Trio would have very, very high name recognition. It's something that we've been hearing about for decades, actually, as the long-neglected jewel of downtown Jacksonville, or as Wayne Wood likes to call it, the Picasso of downtown Jacksonville. Today, we're going to be discussing the past, the present, and the potential of the Laura Street Trio, what it is, why it's so important to Jacksonville, and what's being done to restore and repurpose it. Our guest, as we said, Dr. Sherry McGill, who's retired president of the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, where she served for 25 years, and City Councilman Matt Carlucci. With Dr. McGill's vision and leadership, the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund has saved, restored, and repurposed the old Hayden Burns Library and turned it into the diamond of downtown where nonprofits work and the community gathers. For Councilman Carlucci, this is far from his first rodeo at saving Jacksonville's historic buildings. In 1994, Matt introduced legislation to the city to purchase the old St. Andrew's Church, which was built in 1887. Jen joined Dolores Barr Weaver to raise funds needed to restore the structure. In 2001-2002, he had the city buy the Laura Street Trio just before the historic buildings were about to fall victim to the wrecking ball. As council president, Matt also established a historic buildings task force comprised of council members and community leaders. In addition to trying to restore the Laura Street Trio, Matt is currently working with the Jacksonville Historical Society to restore Old Florida Casket Factory and turn it into Jacksonville's History Center. We welcome Sherry and Matt to the broadcast. It's great to have you with us. Mr. Tolbert, kick it off, buddy.
Well, before we get into the Laura Street Trio, I want to ask Sherry about the Hayden Burns Library and turning it into the Jesse. Tell us about that. Tell us about the history of the Hayden Burns and why you and the fund took on this huge challenge.
Well, thanks, Mike. So the history of the building, what I know about it is it was built in the mid-'60s. Taylor Hartwick, a brilliant local architect, designed that building, was very proud of that building. I only met him once, and that was when we had purchased the building. He and I and a couple of other people walked through it. There was no power in the building. There was no water in the building. He wanted to walk every inch of that building, despite the fact that his health was failing. In fact, he died before we actually opened the building, so before we completed it. You know, what he told me about that building was that he wanted a public library that was really a playful place, colorful, flooded with light, and a place that the public would want to come to. You know, we think of libraries as pretty stuffy places, but if you've ever been in the Hayden Burns when it was a library or in the current iteration of that building, it's far from being stuffy. Right. So I fell in love with the building for a bizarre reason. I had been looking for several years for a building for the Jesse Ball DuPont Fund to purchase in historic downtown, and I do call the North Bank historic downtown. Footnote, I hate the naming that we're using for different parts of downtown, but that's a story for another day. I had looked, Matt, at the trio, walked all through those buildings, the Florida Theater, the Snyder Church, so several buildings in the core. And it was when I walked into the public library, vacant, smelly, no power, water everywhere, stinky. It was a late 3 o'clock in the afternoon on a Friday in December of 2012. And it was a beautiful day, sunny, and the light just flooded through that first floor. And I just felt like we had to have it. And so, the rest is kind of history. It wasn't just about preserving a local gem. It was also about doing a responsible energy saving retrofit. What folks don't really understand about that building, it recycles water, rainwater for the gardens. The third floor is a green roof. It has it's a little putting green actually. Has solar panels on the roof. That roof the area is not large enough for it to be all solar, so it has a few panels, and that just heats water in the building if you need hot water. Incredibly energy efficient. After it came online, it won all kinds of awards. And our purpose in that was trying to prove that you could take these old, crumbling, historic properties and not just retrofit them for a modern purpose, but be kind of futuristic about it. So cool roofs, white roofs, green roofs, recycling water, prohibiting plastics in the building. There are all kinds of things that you can do to really show that a building and its ownership can be responsible citizens in a futuristic way, if you will. And then the third purpose was we really needed to drive down rental costs, operating costs for local area nonprofits. It's the toughest money for nonprofits to raise. No matter how philanthropic people think they are, they don't want to pay staff salaries. They don't want to pay rent. They don't want to pay the light bill. And, I'm sorry, these are businesses, and they have those kind of costs. So we had such a deep interest in shoring up, if you will, the capacity of local nonprofits. We wanted to put as many in that building as we could and really drive down rents. So it's owned by a philanthropic entity that can afford to do that. The fund doesn't need to reap any profit out of that building. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, I want to kind of go back when you talked about your description. It had been that way for a good while. For someone who was part of the original RAP and RAP in Riverside and Avondale, tell us about some of the challenges. I mean, I think that's probably what I know the councilman's hearing, but tell us about some of the challenges that it was to take a building like that, where a quote was historic, but you must have had a lot of challenges, a lot of naysayers. What was it like to take that on? And what were some of the barriers, and how in the world did you do it?
Well, I happened to work for a foundation that had a lot of money. So
well, that helps.
that's number one.
Money helps.
Money helps a lot. But I learned a lot about why it's so hard for these developers to do this kind of work. You can't do it on the cheap. So, you have certain challenges. I wouldn't necessarily call them hurdles, but you have to get through the Historic Commission, and I think rightly so. Mm-hmm. You want to do a retrofit that's appropriate to the building, but you also need some leeway in that. So, for example, we needed to replace the glazing on that building. So that's all the exterior glass. Those are walls. We ran into a hurdle, if you will, but we overcame it. Historic Commission thought of those as windows. We thought of them as walls, exterior walls. They didn't want us to change them, but, we compromised on that. That's $1 million worth of glass.
Whoa.
But you had to bring that building up to Florida wind codes. And it wasn't up to Florida wind codes. So I think what it really is, Mike, is a negotiation over time. And for some developers, they don't have time on their side, right? Particularly if they're borrowing money at relatively high interest rates or they're, so it gets tougher. When we did it, money was cheap. We bought it outright. The owners really needed to sell it because they were, their lender was calling in the loan, and they weren't able to retrofit and bring that building back into use. So we kind of got it for a song. We paid cash for it because we had money. All in, it's a $25 million project. So
Wow.
we paid $2.3 for it, a couple $100,000 in back taxes, which we needed to pay to be able to do the project. We got $7 million worth of new market tax credits, and we took out a traditional loan from SunTrust at the time. But we didn't have to do that. It just was financially smart to do that.
Right.
Leave our money in the market, borrow money really, really cheaply. And because of the purpose of the building, we were able to get new market tax credits into that building, which is also an important story for downtown. Jacksonville historically doesn't have a lot of new market tax credit deals. Local LISC, and full disclosure, I chair that board. They're the experts in bringing new market tax credits to town. So I think we were really the second big project that had new markets. The retrofitting challenges, the tile on the outside columns is about the size of my thumb. Those are individual pieces that were placed in there. Those do not come in sheets. So we had to find someone who could make those. It was kind of a puzzle. If you really stood and looked at one of those columns, you'll notice there are three colors, blue, green, and yellow. But they're in a pattern. They're not random. So the people who are actually doing the work, the architects, the engineers, discovered, oh my goodness, there's a pattern there. So they had to mimic the pattern. I think computers help them do that today. So there were multiple challenges. The really interesting thing about that building, and I don't know that it'll be true for the trio, but that building was built like a tank. If you'll remember, in the 60s, we had these public buildings that were nuclear fallout shelters. It's kind of a ridiculous idea from today's perspective.
Get under the desk, kids.
Right. Well, that'll
save you.
That was a downtown nuclear fallout shelter. So when I first went in, there were still some of those decals in the basement. If there's a 3, 4, or 5, but let's say a 5, bearing down on Jacksonville, you want to be in that building. You want to be in one of those stairwells. It was in incredibly great shape. So we didn't, with one exception, we didn't run into any real structural challenges. The one exception was the basement level. We had to put a new topping slab pour a new topping slab. It was one corner that's kind of would get wet. And that's been that was corrected when we retrofitted the building. But money obviously is the biggest hurdle, the biggest challenge, and we were fortunate because we had it and we could carry it as an asset as part of the investment portfolio of the foundation. So it's a model that could be replicated by entities that have endowed capital. So think private universities, hospitals, even public ones. I mean, they have some of them have huge endowments. But if they thought about their investment capital differently, because they all have real estate investments. Well, you can own one, or you can lend from your own capital to somebody else to do work like this.
Just to take a real quick one, thanks for taking that tour. But very quickly, now that it's there, it has now become the showplace, but it has become the epicenter for Jacksonville's nonprofit. How many different nonprofits now come there, work there, and use that as their home base? And without it, where would we be?
Yeah, so I've been retired 5.5 years, but I do know that there are now 27 nonprofits that rent space in that building. When I retired, there were 20. So they've been able to shrink office spaces. That's another beauty of that building. When United Way came into the building, they went from 26,000 square feet to 19,000. They probably could have gone down to 15 or 12. And I know they've shrunk their space since I retired. So you get the point. It's shared space concept. So all the kitchens are shared. The public meeting rooms are shared. And again, you just control rents on the not-for-profit side because it's tough money to raise. The other piece of that is that what we didn't know, but I think we discovered was, I discovered two things. Local people love that building. And you forgive me, but the politicians at the time missed the point. They did not know that local folks, black and white, had multiple stories about. I met my girlfriend in that building. I used to, hide from my mother. The number of people who would tell me a story about, I remember when, and it all had to do with that building. So that was number one. Local folks actually loved that building. And then number two, we didn't know downtown needed a little conference center. Because what did you have before this came online? You had hotel banquet rooms, hotel meeting rooms. They don't have any exterior lighting coming into them. They're closed, right? Well, Taylor Hardwick, back to his view of what that building could be as a gathering place, light and color. So I think one thing I realized was people like being in that building. It feels good, it's fun, and they like the meeting rooms in that building. So it became something of a conference center.
We had.
Can we move on to Laura Street?
Hold on a minute, Mike Tolbert, Matt Carlucci had something he wanted to point in.
I was going to say I have pictures of when we had the 50th anniversary of consolidation there. And my son,
Matt, you got to show it over here so that people can see it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was showing Sherry.
I know.
Right.
By the way, now you know why you're here. But my son, we couldn't find a place to have it that seemed appropriate. So my son Joe, who's on the council now, he wasn't then, said, "Dad, why don't you go to the DuPont, the Jesse Center?" So we did, and it was so bright and sunny. I mean, and we packed beautiful. 400 people into that place, and it was a great venue. And I've always been so thankful we did it there.
Yeah. Go ahead, Mr. Tolbert. You had something for Mr. Carlucci?
Well, I want to move on to the Laura Street Trio if we could for a minute, Matt. Tell us a little bit about the Laura Street Trio and tell us what you're doing right now with Councilman Boyle and what's the status of that and why is it needed? Well,
there's at least two issues kind of going on now. You got the issue of the financing and the city reviewing the term sheet, the redevelopment agreement, and all that. But then there, to me, look, any of these redevelopments we get into downtown, there's always a risk. You think there might be a risk in the $1 billion we're going to probably wind up spending on the stadium?
Don't get me started.
That's a lot of money.
Oh, there's no risk.
The Laura Street Trio is, yeah.
I did that with a straight face.
What time is the snow supposed to start today, by the way?
So the Laura Street Trio is the first set of buildings that really came out of the ground after the fire, particularly the Marble Bank building. And you know what? They decided to take a chance on Jacksonville because this city was nothing but ashes. I mean, this city was obliterated, like a nuclear bomb had just blown it up. And I've read a lot on the Great Fire. And just when they thought the fire was the worst thing that could happen, then the fire got over there where all the ammunitions were at the old
Armory?
Armory, yeah, the Armory. And then there was another building that had ammunitions in, and everything starts blowing up. And miraculously, they think more than 7 people died, but they recorded 7 people died in that. That was such a setback. But at the same time, a lot of people took a chance and looked at Jacksonville as an opportunity to rebuild into an even better, an even greater city. And that's why I always call Jacksonville the great city of Jacksonville, because we are great. And we've overcome so many obstacles, that Great Fire being probably the worst. But the Laura Street Trio is at the epicenter, to me. I call that kind of the ground zero of the core, the downtown core. I'm not talking about the stadium area. I'm not talking about Brooklyn. I'm talking about what everybody who's lived in Jacksonville for any length of time remembers downtown as, the core. Basically from Berkman Plaza to the Times Union Performing Arts Center, I'll always call it that, from the North Bank back to James Weldon Johnson Park and City Hall. That's the core. That's the walkable core. So what this Laura Street Trio will do, once it's like Mike or Wayne Wood calls it our Picasso, and Sherry wrote the most fabulous story on that in the newspaper. And I got it hanging up in my office on the corridor where everybody can see it as they walk by. But
Great.
The Laura Street Trio is probably the most significant trio of buildings, the most historic corner in all of the Southeast. And it belongs to us. And it's what makes Jacksonville different from other downtowns. And every downtown has historic buildings and sections that are unique to that particular downtown. That's what makes downtowns great, and that's why cities are known by their downtown, because if you drive down Beach Boulevard, you could drive down Beach Boulevard to another place that looks just like that in another city. Mm-hmm. But you cannot go to downtown Jacksonville, and it doesn't look like anywhere else. It is Jacksonville. And it's a city that entrepreneurs and business people took a chance on. They took a chance on redeveloping in Mercantile Bank. That was the Marble Bank building. That was the first one built in 1902. And the city's spirit helped the city rise like a phoenix from the ashes. It plays a huge role in the history of downtown Jacksonville. And that is critically important, I think, to our identity, to who we are as a people, and where we've come from and where we're going to. The architectural features of this building are just magnificent, and you can't find them anywhere else.
Can I interrupt for just a moment? Only because we should have done this at the top, perhaps, but we didn't. The 3 buildings that we are talking about, as you pointed out, is the old Florida National Bank building, which was built in 1902. Mm-hmm. The second one is the Bisbee building, which, by the way, is a Clutho building. Mm-hmm. That was built in 1908 or 9, between those two. And then the third is the Florida Life building, which, again, next to the Marble Bank building, and that was built in 1911. So to give you a historical perspective on this thing, we're going back to the turn of the 20th century here. And they still stand today.
And the fire was in 1901.
1901 was the fire.
In May.
Exactly. So anyhow, I just wanted to point that out so people.
I'm glad you did. And one of the reasons that I've heard Wayne Wood say that he likes the approach that Steve Atkins, who's the current developer of this trio, he's owned it for a long time. And back 20 years ago, there was a lot of people who loved this trio of buildings, but it was owned by European ownership, and they were a few months from taking the wrecking ball, knocking them down, and just building something that could go anywhere else in any other downtown. So I worked with John Delaney, the then mayor, and we bought that. We bought the trio of buildings, and it has taken quite the journey. And what's interesting, though, is when I put together a historic downtown task force. That was really the first time that I think the council and perhaps even the mayor's office decided to take a real focus on our historic stock of buildings and what we could do with them and how they would lend to the authenticity of Jacksonville and who we are and where we're going. The playing off of the modern buildings with the historic buildings, I think, is a great chemistry. And it's what makes a downtown fun to go to. So Wayne Wood really likes the way Steve Atkins is doing this restoration, because the buildings that are being attached to it, that is new construction for the hotel and for the housing, they in no way overshadow the three buildings. And actually, it's called the Laura Street Trio, but two of them face Forsyth. One of them faces Laura Street. Mm-hmm. But it's the Laura Street Trio, and I think Jerry Spinks is responsible for coming up with that, coining that name. So what will go there is it'll be restored just like it was when they were built. The Marble Bank building will be a fabulous restaurant. When you go down in the basement, there are there are the bank
vault. The vault.
Yeah, the vaults. Yep. There's some humongous vaults in there that can actually act as they'll be restored so that if a corporate meeting is needed to find a cool place to,
or put your wine there.
Yeah, put your wine there.
Or cigars.
Take the Carlucci family and have a dinner there. But really and truly, the architectural features of it is fantastic. It's got a skylight at the top. It's got a second floor where people will be able to dine as well as the first floor. It's unbelievable. The Bisbee building was...
So what does your bill do?
Well, what my bill does...
What does your bill do, Matt?
It is the engine that makes this thing go. It provides it okays the redevelopment term sheet, and that's what's being reviewed right now by our council lawyers, the council auditors, and so they've got to scrutinize all that. But I will tell you that we're never going to find the perfect deal on that. Look, downtown, since we've had the DIA, they've done some great things. But also, we have a lot of developments that just have never come around. And what's interesting is the Laura Street Trio, those three buildings were the catalyst that sparked the excitement for downtown historic restoration of these older buildings, and yet they're the three that still are waiting in the wings. But 20 years ago, we did the Carling, 11 East Forsyth. Some years ago, the Chop House finally came on.
Not to mention that the department store that turned into City Hall. Let's not forget about that either.
Yeah, that predated this, it was a
restoration project.
It was a restoration project, and so historic restoration.
So what does your bill do, Matt?
What
does your bill do?
It approves the term sheet, the development contract. That allows.
What does that mean?
If the bill passes, it allows Steve to move forward with the help he needs from the city and to invest the money that he has. He has found some dollars from Capital One and their commercial division that is low interest rates. So his ask from the city is not as large as what it had been rumored to be, because he found the lower interest rates.
What is it?
How much is it? Yeah.
I think it's 7%.
No, I meant how much is the city going to be kicking in with your bill?
I think
potentially the city could be pitching in nothing.
So the bill is a gap funding? Is that what it's called?
No, it's really it's not really a gap funding. He needed gap funding until he found the low interest rate.
Okay.
It's but there's some security money that Capital One wants set behind in a reserve account in the event that Steve needs the help to meet the principal and interest the first 2 years. But the ask is nothing like what everybody thought it was.
And early on, Mike, you asked me a question about the challenges of doing a historic building. Remember, the Hayden Burns was built in 1965. These were built in the first 10 years of the last century. So they're much older. But anytime you do a historic restoration, you're always going to run into the unexpected the window has to be historic. The little story I told about the tiles. Yeah. We had to find someone who could make those tiles. And we found, I think, one company in Miami. So, it's hard. It's hard.
It's hard. But today I went to the Barnett building, which is right on the other side of Hogan Street.
Right.
Or of Laura Street from the Marble Bank. And I went in to take a look at it. Steve Atkins was the contractor on that. Fabulous.
Yeah, beautiful.
If you ever go in there, it's spectacular. What my bill does is it authorizes the development agreement and gives the green light to Steve to begin his work. And I had redevelopment agreements, a realtor, a developer. I am not. I'm an insurance agent, but I know these are complicated agreements. They have to be looked at, and I'm happy to let all the auditors and the attorneys take their turn in scrutinizing everything. But
do you have the votes? Do you have the votes?
I understand that there might be the votes there, but I don't know firsthand because by sunshine law I can't take a toll. I can't take a poll from my colleagues on if you're going to vote for it or not. But I hear through different people who are interested in the project that it has 10 votes. But if it has to be voted on as an emergency, it would need 13 votes.
Where is the mayor's office?
So when is all this going to happen?
I don't know quite yet. The bill, I'm hoping that the bill, I will introduce it at the next council meeting, which would be, I think, December the 9th. But then there's only one council meeting in December. So I think that lends some time for the auditors and the development team and the attorneys to get together and review the term sheet and the development agreement and so forth.
Where is the mayor's office on this?
I understand that Steve is meeting with Mayor Deegan. I met with Mayor Deegan on it, and I told her, there were, two really big projects that I wanted to see through this term of the council, and that is the Laura Street Trio. And my heart and soul, like Sherry's and all of everybody's that I know, everybody here, is in that Laura Street Trio and wants to see it done. And damn it, they took a chance on us. I think the city needs to, if it's not a perfect deal, well, I think this one's worth rolling the dice on because he's proved that he could do it at the Barnett. And that was in worse shape structurally than the Trio is, actually, when you get right down to it.
So for obviously, if you're not sure where the votes are, what's the opposition? What's the perceived opposition? And what's the issue? Is it the money? Is it other people are doing or trying to do historic?
Well, it's hard to say what the problems are because they're still ironing out some of the details, and so and then the auditor doesn't. The auditors, and that's really who we should be listening to more than anybody. We should listen to the attorneys. Listen to the attorneys, but the council auditors play a huge role here. Now they won't recommend against it. They won't recommend for it. They're just say, look, here's the pluses, here's the minuses. This is our view on it. And council, you set policy and you vote on it how you want to.
But you know, as you say, to listen to the auditors as well as the lawyers, one also can't forget the people. And I'm sure that once you open up those public comments, and you know this, you've been there longer than anybody, there are going to be those that are going to stand up and say, you're spending all this money on these corporate welfare projects when I need my garbage picked up, I need my roads cleaned, I need the potholes filled. And people are going to look at this as saying, are we spending money on this, or are our priorities in the neighborhoods in taking care of people and services? How do we answer that, Matt? How do we say we can do both?
I think actually the stadium deal is doing us a great favor by completely overshadowing
That's true.
any of the details of this project. But look, the lawyers will find some weaknesses, I'm sure. They'll find strengths. And there's some great strengths in this. This is one where, it's not just corporate welfare. If this goes according to the way it should, and I believe that it will, it's going to wind up sending money back to the city over a good number of years, which will be used towards our critical quality of life issues like the homeless and affordable housing. And by the way, 30% of the housing in this project of the Laura Street Trio is affordable housing, and that's desperately needed in the downtown area. This will be a signature project. It will be the project that really brings a new day for the downtown core of Jacksonville. And from this development will spring forth a lot of other projects.
Not to interrupt, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Sherry, you've been through this. Now, again, you said up front you had a little bit of money, but there's probably some insights or suggestions or thoughts that you've got about where we are.
Well,
or what they should be thinking about, or the council members should be thinking about.
Well, thank you for that. A couple of things. So, and we don't give points for this, which really frustrates me to no end. So, people, when we were doing the Hayden Burns Library, why do you care about this old building? It should be torn down, blah, blah, blah. It didn't matter who was paying for it. I heard that aplenty. And, folks we have a hard time measuring the catalytic effect of these projects. But I can tell you, Burrito Gallery across the street told me once they hired 6 people. I mean, I can't tell you that it was cause and effect, but I believe in my bones what the council member says about these buildings. They are the centerpiece of modern Jacksonville. And just as I explained, I thought the politicians missed how much the people loved the Hayden Burns Library. Look at the number of people who visit that building regularly. Mm-hmm. Listen to the comments about that building. Matt talked about the 50th, anniversary of consolidation occurring there. The same thing is going to happen with the trio. And I guarantee you people are going to say, I can't believe we almost tore these down, or we almost allowed these to fall down.
You're going to have a lot of corporate people visiting Jacksonville that are going to stay in that Marriott Signature Hotel.
And honestly, and I couldn't prove this, I'd be surprised if the developer makes a lot of money off this project because it's a hugely expensive. He sure has earned it. I'm going to tell you because I have followed this. I have followed him in everything he's had to do for so many years, and but this is our chance, right?
And it may not be perfect, but it's the most complicated redevelopment project in downtown. I want you, because you're a better talker than I am, and I want you to talk a little bit about, our Picasso and a little bit about.
But I don't know I wrote that story based on an interview with Wayne Wood and his great article in Artist
Well, you're
magazine.
quite modest, but go ahead anyway. Will you? I just think.
Well,
I think you
want
have
to comment on your comment about uniqueness and why that matters. So Matt made the point that new construction looks like new construction anywhere in the country.
Yep.
It doesn't feel like a place. Some years ago, when I was still at the DuPont Fund, we hired the National Trust for Historic Preservation. You came to that meeting, to their Green Lab to do a study of historic properties in downtown Jacksonville. It's a report I'm still really, really proud of. But the guy who delivered the report to the folks who came to hear him made this comment, I'll never forget it. He said, Jacksonville is fighting with itself over whether you want to be Palm Beach or you want to look like Jacksonville. So you want to look like everywhere else in Florida? Go ahead, tear them down. Go ahead, let them fall down and build some kind of ridiculous high rise.
So I'm going to tell you that I don't mean to interrupt, but just dovetail into that. So I went to Charlotte one time at a time when I was helping Audrey Moran when she was running for mayor, and she asked me to, head up her downtown committee. So I said, sure. And I went to Charlotte, talked to their downtown development people, their tourist development people, and I said, tell me, what do you hear about Jacksonville? Now, this is 20 some odd years ago, almost. No, probably about 15 years ago. But anyway, they said, well, not that much. And I said, okay, I get it. They said, but there is 3 things that y'all have that we wish we had in Charlotte. And they said, of course, number 1, you got the St. Johns River. I said, yes, we're aware of that. The second thing they said was, you have more retail space, although unoccupied, but the task force I had put together did an overlay of retail because there was no daggum coffee shop that you could find outside of a Starbucks in the Landing in a corner coffee shop downtown. Nowhere. Nothing. And then the third thing they said was, and you have a larger stock of historic buildings, and we wish we hadn't torn so many of ours down, and you need to take full advantage of leverage those because those buildings are unique to what makes Jacksonville the city that you are. And also talking about new buildings and old buildings, I like the new buildings that are shiny that go up as long as there's some authentic buildings to complement them. The older building materials, marble, granite, the brick, those kind of materials, they only look better with age.
Can't say the same about hardy board, can you?
No, you can't say that about hardy board. You can't say that about aluminum framing around large windows.
Nope.
But the older materials only look better as the years go by, and it just lends that sense of history, where the city came from, where it was before that, and that it came from ashes to those buildings, which built the forward thinking of where Jacksonville could go in the next 100 years. And it's I think it's damn important to save them. They're beautiful, and we've got a chance to get it done. And I think that as much as we scrutinize the development deal and the term sheet and all that stuff that the auditors and the lawyers are rightfully looking over to do their fiduciary job and help me do my fiduciary job for Jacksonville. But we got to be visionary as well. We can't just be stuck. We got to be visionary. What she and her friends did with the Hayden Burns Library, that was visionary. I mean, when my son told me to go, that we could have our consolidation, we went over there. I said, my God, this place is gorgeous. Mm-hmm. I love it.
It was perfect.
It's so bright and sunny.
It was a great evening, a great celebration.
So anyway, I will tell you that Steve will do a fabulous job of restoring this into Jacksonville's Picasso.
Guys, I hate to throw it open here, but I'm looking at the time and we're way over what are supposed to be. Can I get a commitment from both you, Sherry, and Matt to come back, particularly once this bill of yours starts making its way through council and we can follow it with you and hopefully help it move it along? Is that okay?
Yes, and the bill will be, I think I'll be introducing the bill, not on the addendum tonight, but perhaps filing deadline is Wednesday, and this council and a few councils before, they only have one council meeting in December.
Yep.
I can remember when we had 2 council meetings in December. We just moved the second one around so it wouldn't be on Christmas Eve, right?
That's probably a good idea.
But we get the rest of December, but that gives a lot of time for review.
Let me finalize
Yes.
this one thing, and I'm going to go back to your words from September 18th when you were on the show before.
Okay.
You said because we touched on the trio when you were here before, but the comment that stuck in my mind was you said it's now or never that we do this. Why?
Well, because I think we've got a deal in place, and I don't know how much better deal that we're going to get. And, and Steve Atkins has invested so much into this for very little in return. I hope he makes a heck of a lot of money.
Oh, I
on
do
it.
too.
But structurally, it's got some issues. Now, I want to temper this a little bit because that's 20 years of pent-up passion wanting this thing to pass, dadgummit. But if this for somehow didn't work, it can still be done. But I just don't want to start over a long haul.
Another 30 years.
And look back and say, damn, I wish we'd have just gone with what Steve Atkins had put together. And will there be some risk? Yeah. Well, let me tell you what. There'll be risk when we start negotiating on the new stadium deal.
Oh.
There's risk with every public-private partnership. Michael, you were involved in a lot of public-private partnerships when Jake was mayor and Tommy and others. Are they risk-free?
Not hardly.
Okay. And the ones that fail always make it tougher for the ones coming down the pike. But how many actually worked? A lot of them actually worked. And when it comes to historical buildings, 11 East Forsyth worked. The Carling worked. The Barnett worked. This one can work.
Yeah, I almost feel like, my gut, my campaign thoughts come out, is that all you need to do is take Wayne Wood's book and put that in front of every one of these councilmen and say, open it up. We talk about, we want a downtown. This is one of those things about leadership. Do you plan for today or do you plan for the future? And have them open up that book and say, we want to bring people back downtown. Well, you got to have something that brings them back down. I'd have every one of them, I'd open up that book and say, look at all that we've lost. Yeah, there are no guarantees. Yes. But, and again, don't want to go back because I got Sherry and I got Mike Talbert here. But think about Lot J and what was it, the breadbasket, whatever they were going to come up with. What I'm trying to say was, if we want to do it, we can find a way. Is there a risk? Yes. Will there be critics? Yes. But we got to think about, what do we want our downtown to look like? Why do we want our downtown? And we've got to have something that brings it downtown. And it's about leadership.
You're exactly right. And we have to keep our fiduciary duties in order. Okay, we have to keep those near and dear to us because we owe that to our constituents. But we owe to our city, the great city of Jacksonville, to carry on this vision of where this city is going to eventually be. I'd like to see it in my damn lifetime, but if it doesn't, I hope that I've done something to help it along. So there will always be some risk. But sometimes you have to weigh what's greader,
Sherry,
taking the risk or making this thing work.
Sherry, you want to chime in? I saw.
Well, I just, kind of 2 closing comments. I'm always a little bit incredulous that we are actually going to have a conversation about taxpayers putting $1 billion into a athletic facility because we own it. And, we don't bat our eyes too much, right? Or we haven't yet. And we argue about what is going to be a relatively small commitment, stress relatively small commitment, on 5 buildings downtown, which are going to be signature pieces, which include affordable housing, which, as the council member said, we're not incentivizing downtown. We may be incentivizing housing, but we're not incentivizing the kind of housing in the core that, plumbers can afford. And I just find that problematic from my perspective.
Plumber could afford it. I guarantee you that. But listen, I will say, I had it just 2 seconds ago, and I lost it. And Mike's telling me it's time to go.
Yeah, it is. It is. Tolbert, you got anything else you want to add to it? And then I'll write it down, Matt.
No, I just appreciate both of these people very, very much. I appreciate your service. I appreciate your leadership, and I appreciate your friendship
and your vision
and your passion.
Well, thanks for having us. And Matt, I just want to be able to have a drink there. I want to see it happen before I die.
I want to be a part of at least the first toast when that restaurant is open. Even if I'm out,
I'll meet you there. We'll be in our wheelchairs.
Even if I'm outside, just let me toast while everybody else is toasting.
The only thing I would suggest is, there's a lot of folks. You talked about people of Jacksonville. Reach out to them and have them. There are 14 district councilmen and 5 at large. Have them. Let us know how we can come down and talk to them.
Well, one thing I was going to say, and I just remembered it, but we have a lot of council members who are somewhat new to Jacksonville. And so, because of that, they don't have the same history of understanding the importance of the trio. And they bring great ideas, and they can buy in on this because they'll understand the concept. But we have been around Jacksonville forever. But some council members are newer to town, or they're younger. And so...
give them a copy of the book.
Might be a good idea to have a little meeting at downtown for the council members to all come and listen to those historians tell the story.
Good idea. Or if they want to come here, they're more than welcome to be on Mike's on Mike.
There you go.
Have them. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Sherry, so very much.
Thank you for sharing, both of you.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
for what you're doing and you have done and continue to do.
We will be on the warpath.
That's going to wrap it up for another episode of Mike's on Mike. Thank you very much for joining us. Please join us each week. You can find us on Facebook, on our website, mikesonmike.com. You can find us on iPodcasts. You can find us on just about any place you get your podcasts.
Or the downtown post office wall.
That too. Anyhow, let us know what you think of the show, and please join us next week. Thanks so much for being with us, and take care, everybody.
Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Mike, love y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike's on Mike with Mike Hightower, Mike Tolbert, and Mike Miller can be found at your favorite podcasting platform, Facebook and YouTube. Learn more at mikesonmike.com. Join us next time for more conversations with Mike's on Mike.